quote you see up on the wall comes from the president of the Chinese equivalent of Google, Baidu. You may remember a year and a half ago when there was a lot of news coverage about Google being bounced out of China. Wasn't a big deal to the Chinese. Google had about 24% market penetration. This fellow owns the company that has the largest share. Now there's a danger in contrasting America versus China. We're not all bad, they're not all good. They have many problems. They have an aging population. They have an economy heavily oriented towards export that is directly dependent on our ability to absorb it. They've got structural and other changes. So it's not great China, poor US. But they're doing some things better. We refuse to learn from them. And Robin Lee is exactly right. If we don't do things smarter, we are so badly outnumbered. Project out 50 years and see where the majority of Nobel Prize winners in chemistry, in mathematics, and sciences, and astronomy is coming from. If I was a betting man today, I would say America would not be dominating those fields as we have in the last 40 years. Now, remember the phrase we talked about a little earlier about power of imagination? Great concept. How do we start translating that into a message that people can relate to? Newsweek cover story a year ago on, for the first time in their ways of measuring this, first time American creativity is declining. Creativity begins very, very early on. It can be stifled or it can be promoted in the early years of life. And the article says that unlike so many other countries, we have no national policy on fostering creativity. I'm not sure right now we have much of a national policy on anything. But other countries have a full-blown creativity policy from the early years on, recognizing that going forward, creativity is a critical aspect of a person's skill set. And Judy Estern, if you've not read this book and if you're interested in the subject, that is the single best thing you can read on this issue. Talks about no child left behind. And say, well intended, but it works against creativity. It forces teachers to teach to a curriculum. Does not, in fact, teachers are penalized if they promote creativity because their kids are not going to be doing as well in standardized tests. It's a nonpartisan statement. It was adopted by the Bush administration, basically accepted with some amendments by the Obama administration. Our national policy is to get people to memorize and vomit it back out later, and that's how we measure success. Judy Estrin characterizes that as doing this. Whatever happened to the phrase American ingenuity? It's what drove us. It's what made us great. That's now it's being stifled. And that's where libraries and the power of imagination and taking those young kids and exposing them to worlds they would never see before, never see otherwise. That's where your role comes in. You have a very powerful role in the matter of innovation and creativity. Other countries are exposing, and some of your programs, some of the library programs, let's think of these. You take young kids and you say, here are 5 ideas. Can you pick the best one? Or here's the puzzle. What's the best way out? Maybe it looks like this. Or, here's cheese. What's the best way of getting that cheese? Do you kind of sneak around out back and try to pull it off? Do you take your best buddy and throw him on the trap? While he's screaming in agony, you pull the cheese off? Or, maybe there's a better way. You hear about innovation and creativity. Some of those children's programs. You've got some libraries here where if you take the head count of kids who go through your library programs, that's greater than the population of those kids in the county. That message will resonate. That's a good story. Going forward, America will fall or succeed on its ability to generate ideas. The Carolinas, and I know there's at least one South Carolinian like me in the room, the growth of the Carolinas from 1880 to about 1970 was predicated on us being cheaper than any place else. We got jobs out of Michigan. Why the textile and the furniture mills here? Cheaper labor. They were somewhere else before. And for too long, we continued on, we're cheaper. Being cheap is a losing strategy. because the economic game used to be played on a state versus state basis. It is still to a certain extent. But economic development now is a global battle. Nowhere in the United States, not even the poor county part of Moore County, will ever be the cheapest place to do anything anymore. The cheapest place to do something is across several bodies of water. We have won by the cheap game, we have lost by the cheap game. Our future is predicated on, can we win on the smart game? Are we smart enough? And there's any number of indications, and we'll look at them shortly, that we're not. And the library can help address that. Anybody here familiar with the term obsolete? Suggest you make it part of your vocabulary going forward. It's a contraction of obsolete and knowledge. The idea being, you know this, information, knowledge changes so dramatically, so quickly. It's tough to keep up with. It's been estimated by American Medical Society, AMA, that a freshman medical student, 20% of what he learns in his freshman year, his or her freshman year, is obsolete by the time he or she graduates. The knowledge changes over that quickly. So teaching critical skills and innovation and creativity is a critical part of what our education system ought to look like. What it ought to look like. You hear, and you have heard it, you all heard it. You know, we like the library, but these are tight times. We like schools, these are tight times. This isn't really the right time to come to us in terms of increasing our expenditures on knowledge. Well, this report talked about, you can read the opening line there. If a foreign country imposed our educational performance levels on America today, we can consider that an act of war. That report did not come out 2 months ago, 2 years ago, not even 2 decades ago. That report came out in 1983, the first term of President Reagan, by a commission chartered by President Reagan. And since then, there's been one report after another talking about how we suck. And sometimes it said just like that, and sometimes it said nastier. Rising above the gathering storm. How we're falling behind in terms of science. This report, Rising Above the Gathering Storm, was updated last year. Rising above the gathering storm, approaching Category 5. Those of you in Category 5 know what that references to. Intensity of a hurricane. On a radar screen, on Category 5 looks like that. On the ground, it looks like that. Most recent comparative analysis to how we're doing as a nation. A year and a half ago, the Atlantic Century comparing our economy versus 40 other economic entities around the world in terms of the investments in research and development, investments in our educational infrastructure, investments in libraries and other things. And it may not surprise anybody that overall, at the end of last decade, we were ranked 6th of those 40 entities. That's not particularly good. But it also took a look at trend lines. What's happened over the last decade? Probably wouldn't surprise anybody to see China at the top. See, U.S. is on that list somewhere. We're 40th out of 40. 40th out of 40. A message for at least 3 decades that our performance versus the rest of the world is in decline. And what's the American reaction been? Hey, we're USA. God's chosen people. Don't worry about us. We'll do fine. Politicians dither. Nobody gives a damn. We've accepted mediocrity. Part of your role, as I see it, is to help change that. There's a larger role here than protecting the integrity of libraries as institutions. I think you've got an advocacy role in terms of mobilizing the nation to recognize where we stand, where we came from, where we're likely to go. Never has Pogo been more correct. When it comes to education, we hear a lot of people talk about, comes to the economy, I hear people say, well, as soon as the economy comes around, we'll be fine. That's where those people have their heads. In fact, that's the polite way of saying it. I'm tired of being polite. Let me give you my translation of that slide. Here's where we have our heads. as a nation we continue to do, spend mountains of time on trivia. Can't get our act together on the important things that will determine our future. Don't recognize not the importance of knowledge and the importance of libraries within that context. You know what that is, don't you? That's a used to be when it comes to education and economic performance. When I grew up, we were number one in diversity, everything worth being number one at. And that wasn't that long ago. I'm old, but I'm not that old. Used to be, if you went to college and you had a Commodore 64, you were state of the art. 64K of rank. What the hell could you do with all that memory? Possibly 64K. Used to be, you could drop out of school in North Carolina and get a pretty good job at a textile mill. That used to be the state library, Capitol building. Used to be, we were number one. Let me give some other numbers we are now. Hey, like the sounds of USA, we're number 14. But we're number 17, or 25. If those were soccer rankings, it wouldn't bother me a bit, but they're not. There's an organization, an internationally recognized organization with substantial credibility that every 3 years measures the skill levels of 15-year-olds in a number of categories, including reading, science, and math. So this is actually 54 countries. 40 of them are compared to us. Of 40, we are 15th in terms of reading proficiency, 17th in terms of science proficiency, and 25th in terms of math proficiency. And several of us were talking during the break. We're not doing things that other people are. Singapore. Recognize that Singapore is a much more homogeneous population than the United States has, so it's easier working that regard. But nonetheless, in one generation, Singapore, with a number of low-income people, have gone from the bottom of economic achievement to second of those 40 entities by almost every measure. There are places in Asia that have the same level of performance or very similar. So we sink, they rise. And people, positions of influence, think the libraries aren't quite as relevant. And maybe the school systems, okay, we're America. I yield to no one in the room in terms of love of country. But I also yield to no one in the room in terms of disgust of our country's performance and our priorities right now. That's the company we're keeping educationally, knowledge-wise. Some of those are nice places to visit, but that's not the intellectual company I want to keep. How do you turn that around? The same organization that measures these things also says the most effective way of countries that want to increase their performance, what parents can do to help their children, read to them early. Early literacy and all those great reading programs that y'all do. Get beyond putting it in the context of a loving mother reading to her child. Put it in the context of its importance to America's future. You reach people for whom the warm and fuzzy, it's not that important. Now, let me ask you a multiple choice question. Take a look at the names for a minute. Okay, multiple choice. Who are they? Are they, A, members of their respective delegations to the United Nations? B, members of their most recent Olympic team? Or C, 84% of the winners of the Intel National Science Search Contest last year? Obviously, they are C. Look at those names again for a minute. 84%, all first-generation Americans. You ever see the National Spelling Bee on ESPN? Well, I don't know why it's on ESPN, but it is, because it's competition. Who are the faces in the audience? Not many not many traditional old-line white Caucasians, are there? A lot of Asians, a lot of South Americans. And you can see the intensity on the parents' faces. You can see them wanting their children to succeed. I bet that's what my mom and dad looked like during the Depression when they were committed to giving me a better life. Anybody remember what that was about?
Geritol.
Thank you. Absolutely, Geritol. Run down, feeling tired? Take Geritol. Tired blood. Those kids, that's our national Geritol. What's that make the rest of us? Tired, complacent. We're the tired blood. Why aren't there more second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh generation Americans in that crowd of intel? Because we've gotten lazy and complacent. We think there's American exceptionalism that makes us special. The only thing exceptional about us right now is our laziness. Libraries are part of cramming Geritol down our throats. You as librarians can't take that message to an elected body, but the advocates that Jamie talked about and that I'm talking about, that ought to be part of their message. We've been too nice for so long. You don't win legislative battles by being nice. You get hard-ass messengers, and you take hard-ass messages. You need to find those people. For the legislative audiences you're going after, that's the message, and those are the messengers. It's not the same ones you play for many other crowds. But for that particular segment, if you're not prepared to play that game, prepare to lose. Another point that Jamie talked about was return on investment. And it really doesn't matter whether you're talking about your own money and putting it into stocks, bonds, derivatives, whatever, or putting the public's money into libraries. The issue is exactly the same as the one that Jamie defined. What's the return on investment? We go about this a little bit slightly differently. I think I like this better, but this is the only one I got, so I'm going to go with mine. You talked about it, a per month expenditure, $2 or whatever it was a month. It's an issue that's particularly relevant, and if you can give a good answer, particularly resonates in these economic times. There's one library system in the state that I worked with, and their average annual per capita support from the county commission was $19.70. Interestingly, that is the average, just coincidental, but that was the average per capita support by libraries and local governments in the last report put out by the state library. So the question becomes, what does $19.70 buy you today's market? You can go through all those convoluted numbers and all that sort of thing, or you can look at it this way. Well, you go out for dinner, but if you get a large pizza, forget about one of the drinks. You're not going to get that. 1970, go out to a movie, forget the popcorn, and if you go into a night movie, leave somebody at home. A book, Amazon, or at your local bookstore, if you get a good deal, 1970 may get you close to 80% of a single book. Or, depending on your deal, maybe as much as 2 months of internet, high-speed internet. Alternatively, 1970 for this particular library will get you access to that many adult books, that many juvenile books, and all these other sorts of things. It's just a different way of, just a reiteration of Jamie's message. And then if you start doing things like taking a look at the close to 70,000 books for juveniles in this particular county. Actually, this is a municipal, this county library. Calculate the number of juveniles in that county. It's got to be less than 70,000. Divide them into 70,000 and figure out how many books per young child the library provides. How many dollars are you saving those parents who choose to use the library to get those books? We've done a bad job of this. Go back, all those county commissioners and city councilmen who don't darken your doors, they don't have to. They got the Google machine at home. Aren't you Google? If you look at the way the search engines define themselves, why do I need you guys? This book ought to be mandatory reading for librarians. You've seen it, obviously. Some of the people have. It starts off this way, web of deception. That sentence is followed by this sentence. What distinguishes you from everything else, aside from the breadth and the personal service? The main differentiator, as I see it as a taxpayer, you're about the truth. You're about knowledge. You're not about crap. All sorts of crap can be found on the internet. You know that. There are many ways of telling that story, particularly during the political campaign. If you go on Wikipedia, although Wikipedia has made it a little bit tougher to do this, what used to happen on Wikipedia, if I'm running against Carol for office, I go to her Wikipedia notation. Carol Levels was arrested 17 times for drunk driving in 1973, and they sit on there until somebody comes across it. I mean, there's all sorts of ways. The internet is half-truth. It is political bias. It is outright lie. It is misrepresentation. Oh yeah, the truth's in there somewhere. The library is about the truth. How do you make that point? Well, you can go all sorts of analysis, or you can make it as simple as this. This picture showed up on the internet in December of 2001. Poor fellow. The picture came from a camera found at the base of World Trade Tower 2. It was developed, and it was an internet sensation. My gosh, can you imagine what he must have thought at the time of impact? Did he even know it was coming? Well, it turns out that not only this guy was on the top of World Trade Tower 2, he was also there when the Hindenburg explosion. He sailed on the Titanic. Fortunately, he survived, or I guess he wouldn't have made it to the top of World Trade Tower 2. And he's got a good lifestyle because even there, when President Lincoln was and yet that first picture was put out there as truth and believed as truth. In much the same way, and go to your favorite political website, how much of that is truth? Probably the ones you go to probably more truth than others. But how many people of one political persuasion who are not those who will listen constructively and share ideas, how many of them only go to websites that reinforce what they already believe? And how much of that is truth? On either the right or the left, that's another part of the statement. This is a quote. If you're not using it, you should, and it's a verified source. Anybody familiar with that quote? It was made by Craig Silverstein, Director of Technology, for a West Coast technology company. That one. Use it. Don't wait for somebody to ask you the question. That's not a bad sign to be put on the front of every door of every library. That's not a bad quote to put on the cover of a report to a county commission. Here's the way I see those of you who are library staff. There's just a truckload of information, misinformation, everything else out there. What you do, you navigate people to knowledge. You navigate them to truth. Another differentiator. In fact, I love this sign. It's on the front of the main branch of the Union County Library. Right off the bat. You enter these doors, this is what you're going to find. And it's really the contrast between the library and the internet is really sort of a false comparison in this respect. You embrace computer technology. I mean, you've got tons of people coming in to use your technology. You've probably seen that report, if you haven't, it's available online. The percent of Americans who have used public libraries for internet search for various reasons. And we also want to thank you again, sir. I'd never seen that broken down in terms of being able to track what people are using them for. For the commissioner who thinks that's only kids or those are unemployed people on there playing games or whatever, that's the sort of information that can be used to confront that. And here's something I think, and I just found this out Monday morning from Greg Needham at Shepherd Memorial. I talked about the failure to distinguish between sitting at home online and Googling. And while we talk about NC Live a lot, I've never heard particularly good stories, success stories. I know what it's there for. What's the success story? And from what Greg tells me, NC Live is now doing a survey of asking people to volunteer what they've used it for and how it's translated into productivity or some benefit to themselves or their community. Anybody else involved in that here? Okay, thank you. And then I heard one other thing in terms of different values, different ways of measuring what the library does. There it is. We heard this last night at James, the town manager of Bermuda Run, said that he is participating in a meeting next week in which the Department of Commerce is putting together a program for, and he didn't have the name exactly right, but the gist of it is for North Carolina communities to be certified as senior quality communities. Some people, you know about that? So it's the idea, you know, you've seen those signs along the highway, we're an economic development certified community because we meet certain thresholds. Well, this is the same sort of thing, particularly for those local economies that see retirees as part of their future. Certainly Northwest North Carolina is part of it, and some of the Pinehurst, the Southern Pines area, all that sort of thing there. Man. And he sits on Jane's strategic committee. There's the guy who's going to bring the table that's not already there. And you know this, when you talk about retirement communities, libraries are critical. That's one of the first things that retirees look at. We can talk about integrating libraries as part of the Senior Certified Community Program, which is aimed at improving local economies. That's not tense together. But, you know, again, the specificity, NC Live, great concept. I'm loving the fact that they are trying to develop specific stories to show how people have used NC Live to accomplish fill in the blank. That'll be a valuable addition to your weapons. Talked about this before, but it's important to reiterate. After World War II, America was on top of the world in the figure sense. We had saved Europe from World War II, although we gave damn little credit to the Russians, who were a major part of that. But we were perceived as the greatest nation in the world, unquestioned. And then we woke up one October morning in 1957 to this headline, that those brave but alleged stupid Soviets had beat us into space. How could that happen? And we started questioning ourselves. Others questioned us. And those of you old enough to remember, realized the issue on the table was literally, was the American way really the best way? And it was more than just a philosophical question, because if the Soviets could launch a satellite into space, they had the capacity to launch rockets to get the name of the U.S. So it was a military issue, not just pride. And America went to work. Eventually 400,000 of us working for 20,000 companies, some of them in North Carolina, some of them headquartered here. And we worked hard. But still, it was 4 years later that we found out that the first person in space was not John Glenn or Alan Shepard or Gus Grissom or Scott Carpenter or other heroes of my youth, but Yuri Gagarin of Ukraine. Still behind. But the American answer was ultimately delivered, July of 1969. Apollo 5, Apollo 11, Saturn V, when it blasted off, the launch followed by a 3-stage missile. The payload, 2 Americans safely to the surface of the moon, 3 Americans safely back home. Think of that picture now as an analogy for what you do. Launch of children into an academic, into an educational trajectory. Early education, followed by successive levels of academic attainment. The payload here, an American workforce, engaged, knowledgeable, competitive, can compete with anybody and beat most. You have a role throughout that process. When launches don't go well, there are consequences. Challenger, 73 seconds after launch, disaster. 7 American lives lost, prestige lost, space program ground to a halt for a while. Launch problem. We lost another shuttle 17 years later when it broke apart over Texas because of a problem at launch. More American lives lost. The problems with the knowledge infrastructure launch, when that fails, when there's a knowledge failure throughout the progression, the academic trajectory, the consequences there too. People with unemployment skills, not employment skills, unemployment skills. Poverty. High rates of incarceration. The rest of us paying for that. America, I'll tell you one place where we are USA number 1, percent of population incarcerated. We are number 1 with a bullet. We got no problems on that one. And an American trajectory that in terms of slope is an awful lot like that shuttle coming back in. What has happened to us? NASA, when I grew up, that was a source of pride. We can't, the only way we can get astronauts into space now is to hitch a ride on Russian rockets. That's the only way we can. NASA might as well change its logo to something that looks like this. You know, from a standpoint of 2 or 3 times a year now, we have to go explain ourselves to the Chinese in terms of why we're worth investing their money into our bonds. Please, I think we're going to do really good next quarter. What would your grandparents think of us? What legacy have we squandered? How have we let our knowledge infrastructure deteriorate to that extent? I think part of it is this. We had no Sputnik moment. We had no Pearl Harbor. No 9/11. Just a gradual erosion of the American position. But over time, erosion can be pretty dramatic. Too many people have been quiet for too long. Too many people are afraid to offend somebody. I'm not suggesting you put your butts on the line for this, but I am suggesting that as an integral part of a knowledge infrastructure, you have an attendant responsibility to address the knowledge issue beyond just the library, to align with other people in the knowledge infrastructure and make the critical importance of what you know known, and not in a nice way. And it's a hard sell on that part of the equation. Now, I talked earlier about segmented markets. Reflect on just a minute. Think of, for the smaller counties, think of 10 people. For the larger counties, think of 25 people in your county who are in positions of importance and for whom the library now is not important. You don't see them. They're not necessarily negative towards the library, but you're really a non-factor to them. Just think of some people. Okay? The way library advocacy has normally worked in the past is you got a message out, you got a general message out there, and as soon as you put it out by librarians, it doesn't work. The really smart people start clustering folks. Maybe the county maybe the county senator, the county council member, state senator, elected official somewhere else. We'll come up with a mix of messages that will appeal to him or her. We'll take a different message to the business community. We'll take a bit different message to parents. But the best programs are the ones that start off with that general frame that Jamie talked about, but then develop a specific set of segmented messages, and some of those messages are in the handout with the paper I prepared. Not all of them, but some of them are. And then look at it this way, markets of one. Think of somebody on that list that you thought of a minute ago, somebody of importance who's not on board with you now. Do you know what their hot buttons are? Maybe they just became a grandfather for the first time or a grandmother. That message of how that grandchild will be competing against kids around the world like you did not have to, sir, that will resonate. An economic message will resonate. The programs that a library does will resonate. That idea of power of imagination, if you sub-factor that down to American creativity declining and what that's cost us, that's a message that'll play there. Everybody on that list has got some mix of hot buttons different from everybody else on that list in all probability. To the extent that you can identify the hot buttons and develop the right set of messages, that's 2/3 of driving the point home. 2/3. The missing part is who's the messenger. Suppose you tuned in Meet the Press next Sunday and David Gregory had these 2 people on his program. There's a major problem with that slide. Does anybody see it? Pelosi on the right, Boehner on the left, no way. So we will put them in their right positions. In fact, in the case of Mr. Boehner, I should open up the exit door and push him halfway out into the parking lot. But if you were to ask those 2 people, how was the Obama administration doing? Would either of those people say a single thing that would take you by, a single syllable that would catch you by surprise? No. Do you think when a legislator sits down with you or a county commissioner sits down with you as a library staff person or a friend of a library or library board of trustees, do you think you tell them anything that will surprise them? Library directors say libraries are important. You are the worst messengers possible. As Jamie said, you need to get the people from outside the inner library sanctum. Develop those people. It's not easy. Good things never are. It takes work, but it's worth the effort. And if you do that, you will be infinitely different from so many other groups that go and call in Raleigh, who go on county commissions and talk about the importance of what they do. Everybody's saying that. Times are tight for everybody. Everybody's message says the same thing, sounds like. But then you start coming out with tailored messages and a messenger who has credibility with the person on the receiving end. That's the winning strategy. Anything else? If it's not a losing strategy, at best you're holding your own. Who knows Beau Foy? Does your husband like Beau Foy?
I just know him because of the library card campaign.
Who has seen this video? If you have not seen that video, see that video. I'm more of the Beach Boy generation, but I watched, Beau Foy is the lead singer for a group, Ariel Down. This is a guy that, is Pam in the back room anywhere? Pam recruited this guy. You can see his, well, I know you can go to Jane's website, or you can go to any number of local websites, or you can go to the North Carolina Library website. Check the video. This is the best damn messenger to get the importance of the library to young kids I've ever seen. He's incredible. Pam, we're just talking about Beau. Tell a little bit of the story about how you recruited him.
Well, many of you know he's what I call my rock star. He's in a band called Ariel Down. He did a concert in Raleigh, and some folks saw him and were talking to him and happened to mention libraries, and then somebody mentioned him to me, so I just called him up and I said, you know, we do this campaign every year, we're always looking for a spokesperson. He said, well, come meet me, let's talk about it. So we talked about it, and he was like, oh, that's really cool. Usually our campaign runs for months. So we talked about it, we worked on the script, we did a really great video on the White County Libraries. And usually when we do these, I have to run around with my little camera and I'm not a videographer, but he goes, oh no, I'll bring my whole team. So we have this professional team of videographers and all this, and we made a great video. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's on the State Library webpage. And we've made it available for public libraries to put on their webpage. But the really neat thing about it is he is really reaching an audience that we have not reached before. He is hitting the teens big time, and they just think he is the coolest thing. I mean, we've been to probably 25 schools and 10 different public libraries already, and it's amazing to watch these teenagers when he walks in. You know, and I've heard people say, like, man, he thinks the library's cool, it's really cool. You know, it's like he's making this connection, and of course the girls are hysterical. You know, and we were in Wilmington Monday and Tuesday, and we were at this high school with 500 freshmen, and he was up there talking, and I was standing behind a group of young teenagers, and you know, one of them poking me, he's really hot, look at him. He got them thinking about the library, and he's very passionate about what the library does for him and his music, and he talks a lot about that, so it's been great. And he gives the kids his email. We've had people report already they've seen increases in library hard time, so, and he's committed to work with us for the whole year now. So.
And you're not paying him, right?
Not said.
Not paying him.
I'm all over, but
All right. And so that picture is not off the cover of a CD or whatever. That picture is in front of the library. And if you look at the video, there's a great point in there where he's walking around and he's sitting down, he's talking philosophically about all the things you can do with the library. He's talking to a teen audience. And he's walking around and he said, and oh yeah, books. I mean, he's great. His personality jumps off the screen. I was watching the video for about the 18th time the other night on the home computer, and my wife Ramey comes in and says, I think you have a man crush on that guy. And you know what? I think maybe I do. He's just got a great personality. If you haven't seen it, you owe it to yourself. He is the right messenger for those teens. Now, would you take Beau to the state legislature? Would you take Beau to the county commission? No. But that's not a whole lot worse than taking you to the county commission. Get the right messenger. And if it takes a while, the wrong messenger is neutral at best, and the wrong messenger can be counterproductive. Case in point, a lot of you are involved with the Smart Start program, right? I love Smart Start. I think it does great things. With a General Assembly, as of November, for the first time, Republican on both the House and the Senate side, who did the North Carolina Partnership for Children put out in front advocating Smart Start? Jim Hunt. Jim Hunt is one of my personal heroes. But he's the Democratic governor who founded Smart Start. Do you put the Democratic progenitor of Smart Start in front of Republican legislature and expect it to do good? Stupid. Absolutely stupid. Wrong messenger. The message was right. The messenger was counterproductive. Think for a minute, fill in, make, remember those analogies on SAT tests? Nuts are to trees as hippopotamuses are to fill in the blank. All right, think about this. Think about the people you need to bring on board. Beau Foy is to teens as X is to Senator Johnson. Who's the X? Recruit the X. You can get the X on board, he can be the Beau with that particular crowd. Fill this back up here for one reason. That survey was done by American Library Association. When the American Library Association put the results out, it had no resonance. Libraries say libraries are important. But by getting Business Week to embrace it, it conveys an air of authority. And we were able to use that successfully on a number of cases. Go to Wall Street Journal website, Google, put it in the search box, libraries, you find a lot of stuff. There are a lot of people saying good things about libraries and the importance of what you do. Use them. I'm not diminishing the work of ALA and the Urban Libraries Council. They put out some great stuff. It's really great when somebody else will adopt it and use that information as their own. Another example of that, lifelong learning. Most of the people in the room familiar with this report came out earlier this year actually, talking about how important museums and libraries are in terms of developing a competitive job force going forward. Talks about the difference of the world that we grew up in and the ones that Patrick will be growing up in. Last century, most people had 3 to 6 jobs. My father was an exception. He worked for the DuPont company for 45 years. There are a lot of dads like that. A lot of moms didn't work at all. But now the average person, Patrick, if he does well, 10 to 15 jobs. His education does not stop when college ends or wherever he goes. That's the start. Job competition when I was growing up was local, now global. Education model, almost always university, community college, technical school based. Going forward, more and more it's learner-centered. Learner-centered equals libraries in many cases. That's all information by the U.S. Department of Labor. Cite the U.S. Department of Labor and the U.S. Department of Commerce, not that particular study. Love this one. ICMA is the International City County Management Association. Those are the people that most of you work for. Maximize the potential of your public library. That return on investment thing that Jamie introduced earlier today. ICMA saying libraries can be very critical in addressing community priorities. And if we don't use them in that role, we're underutilizing them. Libraries are important and they can do more. Say your bosses. Lynn Thompson's in the back of the room. If she weren't in the back of the room, I would take credit for this next thing by myself. Because I worked with them on the strategic plan, but I had nothing to do with this. It was all Lynn's genius. When they were talking about the strategic plan earlier this year, Lynn said, the town of Southern Pines has a strategic plan. It identified 9 priority areas. We are a department of the town of Southern Pines. We ought to align our strategic plan with what the community has said is important. These things were defined by several hundred, as I recall, and several hundred citizens of Southern Pines over a multi-year period. The plan that came out of it was all this. So Lynn and her staff and her strategic committee said, of those things, there are 5 where we have a major role. The strategic plan then developed along this line. They took each element of the town strategic plan, in this case economic development, they took a look at what the library was already doing in that area. They took a look at what the strategic planning committee had said in terms of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and standard approach during this year's planning process that attached to this. And then the library's final strategic plan connects directly to what the town said was important. So most library strategic plans, or many of them, were predicated on the traditional collections, technology, programs, way of doing it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But here's the library director who said, hey, there's a different way of doing it. There's a more relevant way of doing it. There's a way of doing it where the town council will fully understand what we're all about. Then stand up and talk, we'll take a few minutes and talk about where the inspiration came from and what you've seen as a result of that approach.
Well, I think the inspiration came from the fact that we waited to do our library strategic plan until this other planning process was completed. So, because we, from the beginning wanted to know what that process uncovered, and the way that process evolved was that it started out to be an economic development. It was actually an anti-growth issue in our community, which is kind of interesting. And it sort of developed into this planning. It was supposed to be a land use planning, but then it kind of grew into a whole community planning process. So as a department, we came in on that process later in the process, and I wanted to be sure that we were fully involved. So that's kind of how that all came together, probably more than what you said. Then, as you said, in our planning process, we really wanted to tie to
was the caboose on that train for sure, Lynn, thank you. And one thing Lynn did not mention that was key was her decision to make sure that, that one of the people on her strategic planning committee was the guy who would chair the towns process. So she got buy-in. The other thing she did was the same thing that Jane McAllister alluded to. I know in your strategic planning processes, a lot of them are 40 and 50-year-old people gathered around the table who already support the library. Lynn had a couple of very articulate, bright, not afraid to speak up kids from high school. I mean, and they brought perspectives that I didn't have, I don't think anybody else had. And the plan was shaped in part by what they had to say. So that diversity of people who use the library, if you're involved in the strategic planning process, as several libraries have done, get them at the table. And it's even better if you can find somebody who's kind of negative. Maybe there's a member of county commission, county council, who's neutral in the library. If you can get them to the meeting, get them to the meetings, and show through the strategic process all that's going on. There have been several cases around the state where a library has been able to take a neutral or even negative person on a funding body and to convert them into a positive individual. And nothing's better than that when it comes to advocacy. Eventually it comes down to this. We've got to convince everybody, doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a business person, whether you're a taxpayer, whether you're a new mother, whether you are an employer, no matter who you are, when it comes to quality libraries, not only do you have a stake in it, the stakes are greater than you ever suspected. It comes down to identifying the markets, the messages, the messengers, and making the right connection. It's not an easy process. You don't do it overnight. It was 18 years ago now that Tom Brokaw came out with The Greatest Generation, a book about our parents and our grandparents. They didn't get everything right. Civil rights, not at all. Gender equality, ethnic equality, other equality. Didn't get that right, but they got a lot right. What would they say if they're writing a book about us in 100 years? What about, we were the complacent generation. We were the ones asleep at the switch. We were the ones who were born into a time of economic strength and presided over the rise of American economic complacency. That was us. We were the ones who failed to grasp that if you wanted to grow business in today's economy, you needed to grow the knowledge infrastructure. You needed to make investments there. We were the ones who saw headlines like that and yawned. The ones that produced high school graduates with worthless degrees in so many cases. I said before, a third of those who graduate from high school, a third of the 70% who graduate from high school had to go to remedial education in college. Yeah, that was us. As a result, we produced a whole generation of Americans without the skills to compete in a global economy. That was us. There were our parents and our grandparents, and then there was us. But that's not the way the story has to be written. How about we were the resolute generation? We saw complacency, found it unacceptable. Replace it with a sense of economic urgency. We understood that economic urgency meant investments in our knowledge infrastructure. That the world had changed and we needed new approaches. We just couldn't keep on thinking we're number one when we're number 17. We were smart enough to do that. We realized that we could not afford a knowledge infrastructure where only 22% of our teachers across the board in public education systems in the United States, only 22% come from the top third of their high school graduation class. Think of that for a minute. The countries that are beating us have policies that recruit the top 10% of their high school graduation classes into their teaching cadre. So you can talk about curricula and teaching the test, and those are all issues. But when we start off with we got dumber teachers than the rest of them, that's because we don't reward teaching. We don't acknowledge teaching. What's the American saying? Those who can do, those who can't teach. Teachers are respected in other countries. The ones that beat us. We were smart enough to turn that around. We recognized that knowledge started at the very early stages and continued through a lifetime. That was us. We recognized that libraries are a critical part of the knowledge infrastructure, not a nice to, a have to. Quality libraries. We had the brains to know what to do, and we had the backbone to do it. The brains to recognize those individual, community, corporate, and other actions that could reacquire greatness. And we took those steps. We had the backbone to reject politics and politicians who cared only about the next election. Their own egos, who care less about the future of Patrick and his counterparts, somebody else's problem. Faced with the prospect of being the first generation of Americans to leave a lesser America behind, we said, not on our watch. That's not us. We forced those actions that reclaimed greatness. We stopped sitting on our ass and took action. Aggressive action, in some cases, necessary action. You've all heard the saying, it ain't pretty watching sausage made or laws made. You're not going to dirty your hands. You're not going to affect some of the major people you need to influence. Every library in this room has several books by Peter Drucker, the father of modern management. We talked about management in the context of the corporate world, nonprofit world, the church world. And of all the things that he had to say, nothing is more relevant to the library's future than this. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic. Too many people in positions of influence are using yesterday's logic to evaluate the importance of libraries. You need to turn those folks around. You need to think of tomorrow's logic when it comes to successfully marketing the importance of what you do. It is important. It is critical. It is under-recognized. It is underappreciated. And it is clearly underfunded. And ultimately, it is all about relevance. Anybody recognize Daniel Burnham? And don't worry, this is the last slide. So I hear this now. Daniel Burnham was a great architect at the turn of the 20th century. A lot of people in the room will recognize Union Station in Washington, Flatiron Building in New York, Reliance Building in Detroit. That building, the first major high-rise in the country where the predominant exterior wall was glass, that was designed in 1893. Burnham was ahead of his time, but he's known today not as an architect, but as a city planner. He was the first city planner. Anybody been to Chicago recently or been to Chicago in the last couple of years? He did the Chicago plan. And although that plan is now 104 years old, if you've been there recently, that plan still forms the basis of Chicago's development. Been to Millennium Park? You must have been there, Pam, when you went to Chicago. When you're talking about Cloud Gate, or you're talking about the Geary Amphitheater, it's all entirely consistent with that Chicago plan. But what Burnham is known for today, what he's best remembered for, is this quote: make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood. Aim high and hope and work. Followed by two words: think big. So as you develop your advocacy plans for the library statewide in your own community, let those two words, those two, be 2 of 8 that motivate you. Think big, make it relevant, keep it real. Do anything less, you will fail not only yourself, but the nation. I can't make it more than that than a clarion call of action. It's not just you by yourselves, but you're an important part of that equation. I recognize your importance. My children recognize your importance. I would like to think that 10 years from now, I will not be in the minority, but there'll be a wide claim that America's moving in the right direction. And up front on that, a library is another part of the knowledge infrastructure. I appreciate your time and your patience and wish you the very best going forward. We have one more part of the program today. It's Dr. Anthony Chow, and he'll be introduced by Pam. Thank you.
Okay, we're on the last few minutes. We have Anthony Chow here from UNCG. And Anthony's been working with us, the advocacy task group for quite some time.